Good evening. We're going to be in Luke chapter 10, 38 through 42. There are a lot of things about this. It's always amazed me at how sometimes some of the smallest sections of scripture can give you so much information and so many ideas that come from it. We talked about it a little bit in Bible class today, but I want you to notice the title is "The Best Dish on the Table," and that's actually coming from a quote about this from Robertson's Word Pictures. And there's quite a bit of this lesson that's pulled from that volume. And he does a really good job of explaining, in some cases, he does a very good job explaining not just what the words mean, but the implications of the words and how they were used in that setting and that we're in. And so if you don't have that book, it's a good resource. And that's the reason that I'm pulling it out. You're not going to agree with everything in there, just like any other book. And it's certainly not the Bible, but it gives us some flavors, some ideas that I think are very important in this passage. So Luke chapter 10, verse 38, and I'll just go ahead and read this, and we'll come back and highlight some of the verses as we go on. It said, "It happened as they went, he entered a certain village, and a certain woman named Martha welcomed him into her house. And she had a sister called Mary, who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. But Martha was distracted with much serving, and she approached him and said, 'Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore tell her to help me.' And Jesus answered and said to her, 'Martha, Martha, you're worried and troubled about many things, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part which will not be taken away from her.'" We've had all these things. We've had this discussed many times in the past. In fact, I've actually preached on this before. But the emphasis was a little bit different. I want you to notice, as I was studying through this, I happened to notice something that changed the way the perception that I had about it, and maybe even the point that Luke was making in making the statements that he did, or recording the statements that he recorded. And I want you to think about this as we go through, and we're approaching it from the perspective of perfectionism. And perfectionism is something that is very dangerous for us. And I want to start off by saying that perfectionism is not a spiritual gift. I posted that on Facebook. And the reason I did that is because I thought it was so good, I didn't want to wait till Sunday to say it. But let me explain what I mean by that, because there are a lot of ways that you can define perfectionism. What I'm talking about in this section, as we'll see, and what I think is going on here, is perfectionism is looking at all the trappings. Anytime that there's an activity, anytime there's an event or something happening in our lives, there are always a lot of things that are the trappings for it. There are a lot of activities and things that are behind the scenes. There are a lot of lesser things that are not as important as the greater things. And we have a tendency to look at all the trappings and all the things. And perfectionism then is trying to be perfect in all the little things and even the big things, everything put together. And we're missing important parts. Now, it could also be related to priorities, which really this is about. And that usually when I preach about this or talk about it, it's about priorities. But I want you to notice that it's not necessarily about choosing the priorities here that's the problem. The problem is that every single activity and every single thing in this scenario seems to be as important as the others, that they're not any greater or lesser importance. And when we live our lives thinking that everything that we do, all parts of it are equally important, we're going to be in trouble. This is not something that we should be pursuing. We need to make sure that we remember to take a step back and be discerning and recognize that sometimes things don't matter as much as we make them matter. And so that's the idea of perfectionism, and it's the idea of not a spiritual gift, but I say that in tongue-in-cheek because we know that that's not a spiritual gift. It's never been defined as one. But sometimes it's almost like we feel like if we can just be perfect, if we can do everything perfectly, if we can do all the things and make sure everything is done and all the I's are dotted and all the T's are crossed, then that would mean that we are somehow spiritually better. It doesn't mean that at all. In fact, that's a very dangerous concept because we're not recognizing differences in importance of things. And that's what's going on here. So I'm not talking about the idea of progressing. I'm not talking about the idea of growth. I'm not saying that we should just ignore the smaller things and not worry about anything. As one man said, God God tells us not to sweat the small stuff. And by the way, everything is small stuff. I don't believe that. There are some things that are important, and there are some things that are lesser importance, and we need to be able to discern that. I think that's the lesson we're going to take from this, or we should take from this. So if you think about this, I want to illustrate it by how we could maybe ruin celebrations. This that is going on with Mary and Martha and Jesus was actually a time of celebration. This was a time of honor that this woman who invited Jesus into her house. It's like inviting a celebrity, inviting a very important person, a dignitary into her house. This is the one she probably, at least if she doesn't at the time of the invitation, she does afterward, believe that he is the Son of God, the Christ, the Redeemer that's come. So that made it even greater. So this is a great opportunity for her to come, to invite him into her house and to serve him and to make things go well. But sometimes we get caught up. Have you ever seen or heard of sometimes people getting caught up in the details so much that they miss the important part? For example, we might be so worried and concerned about the decorations that we forget about the ceremony. Have you ever heard of Bridezilla? Someone's so caught up in the details that the ceremony is not really important. The actual bonding together in marriage of two people, a man and a woman for life, really is not that big a deal. It's the ceremony. It's the decorations. It's all the things that they can do, all the trappings. And I want to make it look great. And want to make it, I'm going to spend $10,000 on a wedding so that everyone can see how great I am and how wonderful I am and how beautiful I am and all these kinds of things. That's what a Bridezilla does. And they kind of, some of them, at least for a little while, was kind of be the trend to just be the worst person you can be so that you can have, you're like a slave driver. You're just pressing and whipping and hurting people to make sure every little thing is perfect. And whether or not you make it in the marriage is really not that important. I'm not saying that those people had bad marriages. I'm saying it's about priorities, right? Have you ever seen that happen? I've said many times, and I say it tongue in cheek, but it's kind of mean this too. I would much rather preach a funeral than a wedding. And it's not because it's a happier occasion. It's because the people at a funeral generally are not as concerned about all the little things as in a wedding. And I've seen families fight and argue and divide because they couldn't decide on some minor things in the ceremony. That's kind of silly. It's putting the things that are most important at the bottom of the page. How about this one? We have settings for a meal. Now, when we were at one congregation, they had a contest every year that the ladies would put together. They had a ladies' day, and they would have a speaker and all kinds of things, and I wasn't there, so I wasn't sure how exactly it went, but I do know that they would decorate tables, and every woman got a table of her own to decorate, and then they would invite area congregations, and they'd all get to sit, and they would choose which table they sat on. They probably voted on which one was the best, and they spent days, literally days, putting these tables together. They would, with all the settings. In fact, there was one lady who prided herself that she'd spent over $1,000 setting up a table in the annex of the church building because she was so proud that all these people were going to come and vote for her as the best table. They weren't worried about necessarily what the lesson was about or what they're going to get from it. They wanted all the accolades and everyone to pat them on the back and look how great this place setting is. It seems silly, but we kind of do those kinds of things sometimes. Is that really more important than the meal itself? It was to them, and to some of them, I should say. Or how about the meal being more important than the guests? This happens all the time. Every time you go to a fast food joint, you see this in action, don't you? They don't care about you. They care about getting that meal out as fast as they can, throwing it in a bag, and sometimes don't even care if it's the right stuff. They just throw it out so you can move on so they can get the next person. The customer doesn't really matter. The meal does, right? That's priorities out of alignment. Now, it may work for their business plan, but it doesn't work in the church. Some things are not as important as others. And then we also have the idea of the clothes. Oh man, look at that. The clothes for the time together. I've actually heard people tell me they couldn't come to church because they didn't have anything to wear. That's sad. I don't mean that it's sad necessarily because of them. If they were using it as an excuse, that's sad. But what's sad to me is they would come and feel like they were being judged because they didn't have anything better to wear. I don't know if that actually happened or if it's a perception. You know how sometimes we can walk into a room and we just assume everyone thinks something and they haven't actually thought anything about you? When I was with my father-in-law one time, we were riding around with my brother-in-law. It was just the three of us. And I said something about how I felt I was worried about somebody, how they would think of me with something. And he kind of looked at me and said, "You think you're so important that people are actually sitting around thinking about you?" Touche. He was absolutely right. It was just a paranoia. I didn't know what they were thinking, but I thought it would. And so sometimes clothes we allow silly things like clothes, or have you ever turned around and went home because you're late? One of the things that drives me crazy is being late. It used to not bother me at all. It was late all the time, but it's driven me crazy, not necessarily to the assembly, just anywhere. If I'm running late, I hate it. I get angry. I get in a bad mood. Really? Is that really? I've known people who ruined church because they were running late, and they argued and fought so much on the way to church that it made it miserable for everyone in the car, and they didn't have the right attitude until, 3/4 of the way through the services, they finally calmed down enough to actually worship God. Which one is more important, that you're here or that you're here on time? I tease Adam about it all the time, but he knows it's more important for him to be here than to be late, than be on time. And if that means that he's going to be here every time late, God bless you. You come in late. Some things don't matter, but we make them matter, don't we? This is what we need to recognize. Arbitrary standards is what I'm talking about. Unimportant things is what I'm talking about. And they become so important. But here's the thing I've noticed, and this is what happened with Mary and Martha. The unimportant things are only important to those who chose them to be important. Mary didn't care about the serving, but Martha did. Was it because inherently Mary was lesser than Martha? No. It was because Mary chose and Martha chose what was important. And they decided to act on that. Now, I'm not saying that serving is unimportant, but it certainly has a place, doesn't it? So let's think about this. Why would we behave that way? I think a lot of this is because of fear. We're afraid that we're going to be seen as less important. If I don't wear the right things, or if I don't have the right trappings, if people come to my house and there's a cobweb in the corner. Some of y'all have probably never experienced family coming over and pulling up couch cushions to look underneath to see what you're hiding. What kind of mentality must we have to allow those kinds of things, the less important things, to be more important? It's dangerous. We also have the fear of disappointing other people. What if I try something and it just flops, or it's not up to the standard of other people that other people expect? I face this all the time, and I know all of us do. But there are things that I've tried to do, and I look at sometimes some of the feedback, and it's like, well, the standard is here and I'm here. And I've got to recognize that there's a gap sometimes. And what we have to do is recognize the gap and recognize that we might disappoint other people, but not let it keep you from trying to do what you know you should. Because if you allow the fear of disappointing other people keep you from doing what you should be doing, you're never going to do anything, because you're always going to disappoint somebody. That's a guarantee. You're always going to disappoint somebody. It may be you that you disappoint. Or sometimes we fear a loss of control. So what we have is sometimes we want to control the little things, because we can't control the big things. And so we feel better about ourselves, and we kind of have a little bit of, we kind of feel like we have control of life a little bit if we can just control those small, minor things. Controlling the small, minor things doesn't give you any more control over life. Even if you don't control the minor things, you still don't have as much control. You still have the same amount of control, because there's nothing that you can do in your life to control your life. The things that are going to happen to you in life are going to happen to you in life. And there's very little you can do about it. Yes, we can put ourselves in protective areas. Yes, we can do certain things to maybe lessen the odds. But if something is going to happen, it's going to happen. And all the little things that we want to try to do to manipulate life, it doesn't matter. Perfectionism in this sense will hurt you. And this is what Martha is learning here. It will cause you to miss the things that actually matter the most. So the one who is so caught up in the decorations and worried and fretting, they might miss something that's so much more important. The ones that's so caught up worrying about and fretting about what other people are going to think of them, they miss out on something so much better. We don't do ourselves any favor by allowing those things to continue in our minds. So if we want to be better, we want to learn and grow, we need to understand this lesson from Luke chapter 10. Let's look at the scene here. Look in chapter 10, verses 38 and 39. We have that Jesus entered into a certain village, and a certain woman there named Martha welcomed her into her house. And so Mary and Martha at least were living together. I think Lazarus probably was too, and they were probably all siblings. But Mary and Martha certainly are there. And it says she had a sister called Mary who also sat at Jesus' feet and heard his word. So now we have Martha calling him in, and she is going about setting up tables, filling water jugs, all kinds of things that most hostesses would do. And that was because there were probably more than just Jesus who came. He had a group of people. In fact, it's probably the case that she welcomed as many people as possible in and shut the door on a lot of other people. It's very likely what happened. If not that, it could be that she just left the door open. Nothing is said, but we do know that this is somewhat of a private meeting with Jesus, and she is running around trying to get everything done. And then Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, listening, maybe worshiping. Maybe if you look in John chapter 12, where it talks about Mary anointing the feet of Jesus, this could be the same time. I don't know. But it's very likely she is sitting there in devotion, listening to her master, to her Savior. And then we have the distraction in verse 40. But Martha was distracted with much serving. Robertson's word pictures actually really helped me understand this a little bit better, because he said that the root of this, the heart of this word distraction is the word parts. She was divided into many parts. That's what the idea of distraction is. She wasn't focused. She wasn't looking at what was important. She was doing every single little thing as if they were all equally important. Then we have the approach in verse 40, because look at what it says. Mary was distracted with much serving, and she approached him. And according to Robertson's word pictures again, the word here, the idea is that of bursting in on someone, as in opening a door suddenly. So it wasn't that she just meekly walked up to Jesus. It's that she busted the door open and said, "Listen here." Isn't it interesting how that, well, in fact, let me just hold that for just a second. In verse 40, we have a reproach. She said, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to serve alone? Therefore, tell her to help me." Do you not care? And according to Robertson's, again, he said, this is not a request for Jesus to help. This is a reproach against Jesus, saying, You're monopolizing this woman's time to my hurt. Send her to help me. Stop taking her away from me. With that, and the thinking of the parts and this reproach that she gave Jesus, it was a mild one, but it was still a reproach. Can you imagine what it would take in your mind to be in such a frenzy that you would actually rebuke your own guest for monopolizing the time of the people that you invited him to be around? And say, you need to get her, tell her to come help me. And of course, Jesus' response was perfect. And I want you to notice the other thing, the parts in verse 41. Jesus answered and said to her, Martha, Martha, you're worried and troubled about many things. Now, I was wrong before. I made a mistake. This verse where it says you were worried, that's the word parts. It said you're divided into many parts and you're troubled. In fact, the division that's inside you, the worrying and the fretting that's on the inside is now showing itself on the outside. You're worried and you're troubled. How do you think that made the guests feel? Have you ever been in a situation where you were out, Carla and I were out last week with another couple, and we were eating burgers, and I was eating too many chips. And Carla said, no, and she took it away from me, and they didn't know that this is how we kid each other, and it got awkward because they thought we were fighting right there, right? We're about to duke it out. Have you ever been in a situation where someone gets angry and it's really not appropriate for them to be angry, and all of a sudden now how do you feel? Really strange, right? He's nodding his head like, really strange, like, I think I'm going to sneak out of here, right? Can you imagine how those guests felt when she walked up to Jesus and mildly rebuked him for monopolizing the time of Mary instead of sending her? Do you think everyone else could feel the tension? Absolutely. Because it'd gone from just being frazzled on the inside to now was evident for everyone. And typically, if we get to that point, you've been frazzled before. What is it that you want everyone to know? You want everybody to know how frazzled you are, because you might be hoping they'll help, or at the very least, you can get some sympathy or whatever. I don't know why we do it, but we do. But here we have the parts. But I want you to also notice that the part, he says in verse 42, says, but one thing is needed, and Mary has chosen that good part. Martha, you're chasing a lot of parts. There are a lot of parts to this play. But Mary's the one that got the right one. Mary's the one that got the good one. Mary's the one that got the most important one. In fact, notice what he says, which will not be taken away from her. What's he saying to her? I know you need help. She's doing what is better, and you're not going to take that away from her. Now, she could have gone off in a huff, and I don't know what she did. She could have gone off in a huff. I can imagine, putting dishes down a little too hard, making noise, all kinds of things to show anger, and just because she's mad that Mary isn't coming and helping. Or she could have maybe decided, maybe he's right. Maybe I need to slow down a little bit and pick my battles, and pick the parts that are really important. I kind of like to think that she would have gone maybe and put the trays down and came and sat at Jesus' feet too. Everyone else that came, they weren't coming because they were worried about how great of a hostess she was. They came because they wanted to see Jesus. And she was actually getting in the way of it. And we can get in the way of showing Jesus as well because we're so caught up in the things that don't matter. And it's human nature, we do this. But it also is an opportunity for us to see pieces of ourselves that we might not have realized are there. We get to see what really is important to us. And it's simply a matter of adjusting attitude. That's all it is. It's not a huge deal. It's a matter of adjusting the way we see things and the way we think about it. Mary chose the good part, and Martha chose all the parts. And Jesus says not to worry in Matthew chapter 6. I think this is a big part of it. Stop choosing to do everything and trust God. All the other stuff, it may matter, but it's not going to matter that much in the end. And here's another thing. This is where the idea came from. Robertson said, the best dish on the table was fellowship with Jesus. Isn't that amazing? An amazing thought? It really is. She was worried about all these dishes, and the best one on the table was fellowship with Jesus. She was missing it. Now, this isn't to rebuke women. Men, we do that too. Maybe not in the same way, but we do it. The same reasons, maybe, but we do it. So this is what I think we can learn. Let me see if I can get that to go to the next one. Maybe. All right. So if you're seeking too many of the lesser things, you're going to miss the greater things. And we also need to remember that all decisions have consequences. I don't know, like I said, I don't know what happened here. I don't know if she ever came to her senses and sat down and listened to Jesus, or if maybe she just decided to change her attitude and listen to Jesus while she was cleaning dishes. That's a possibility too. But I do know that we all have to make decisions, and sometimes the decisions we make are not the better ones. But every time we decide what is more important, there always will be consequences. Whether we're right or wrong in that decision, there are always consequences. And even though we have a lot of decisions we make as Christians is not between good and evil, there's plenty of that. But a lot of the decisions we make are between good, better, and best. And when we don't choose the best and we settle for the good or the better, we do hurt ourselves. And Mary got that. She took all the advantage she could of being with Jesus. And Martha, I hope, got it. She could have, like I said, she could have still been serving and still listening. But it's all about our attitude, isn't it? All right, so that's the idea. That's what I wanted to share with you this evening. If you have any needs this evening, I hope that you'll take this opportunity to make your life right. If you're not a Christian and you want to put on Jesus in baptism, let's help you with that. Let us talk to you and study with you if you have questions. If you're ready for that, we can assist you with it. If you are a Christian, maybe you kind of get caught up in putting the wrong things in the wrong order. Maybe you need to make some changes in your own heart. If you need help with that, we're here. We'd love to pray with you and pray for you. If there's anything we can do, please come as we stand and